Of the United States Tennis Association Davis Cup Committee, and I'm very honored and pleased to have with me today Vic Seixas, an old friend and marvelous tennis player who's agreed to come and share with us some of his Davis Cup experiences. Vic, welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
And I wonder if you might just tell us a little bit about some of the experiences in Davis Cup play that are most memorable to you.
Well, Steve, as you probably know, I played a fairly long period of time back in the early 50s, 51 through 57, so I played actually in seven years at Davis Cup. In those days we had the challenge round, as you remember, and it seems like we had to play through all but one of those years to play Australia, who was the holding nation. In the 50s and early 60s, it was Australia and the rest of the world, really.
Right.
And so I played through about 3 or 4 waves of Australians, starting with Frank Sedgman and Ken McGregor and Mervyn Rose and Rex Hartwig. And they turned pro, or a couple of them, and Bowden Rosewall came along and they turned pro, and then Ashley Cooper and Al Anderson came along. By that time, I think I'd probably had enough playing against all the Australians. They were tough.
They were not only double teaming, they were quadruple teaming.
They were dominating the game pretty much back at that time. Although I'd say outside of Australia, we were by far and away the next best country at the time. We didn't have any problem getting to the challenge round and playing against Australia in the challenge round. We did manage to beat them once, which is, of course, the highlight of my Davis Cup career, which was in 1954. And Tony Trapert and I beat Hood and Ken Rosewall 3 matches to 2. We actually won the first 3 matches in Sydney, and that was coincidentally before the largest crowd ever to win a tennis match.
Okay.
Something like almost 27,000 people. So we picked the right year to win, although we only won 1 year out of the 7 that we played. But we played them some close ties, 3-2 a couple of times. But they were just too dominant in those years. But I tell you, the Davis Cup back then, I think, was, maybe it doesn't sound right to say it, but it seemed to be a much more dominating game. It seemed to be a bigger part of the tennis world than it is now, and it has been for quite a while. I think we went through a period there where the Davis Cup sort of lost some of its great luster, and back then it was tremendously big, and especially in Australia, where they took tennis so seriously back in the 50s. It was a tennis boom there long before it hit the United States. So I feel fortunate to have played during that time, especially the Davis Cup play, because of those great matches and great rivals before Australia.
Vic, among those Aussies, who was the player that you found that the toughest out of that whole crop of many wonderful players?
Well, they were all pretty tough on their given day. I think Lou Hood was when he played well, obviously could just blow you right off the court. But he would have off days, as most everyone did once in a while. But I think of all of them, Frank Sedgman was probably the toughest for me, and overall probably the best of all the Aussies, I think, maybe until Laver came along, at least. Laver was in the wings, incidentally, when I stopped playing in 58. It was Laver and Emerson coming along the next wave, so I figured I'd had enough. But yeah, Frank was awfully good and very consistent, and probably the mainstay of their Davis Cup team when they first brought the cup back from the United States in 1950. And until he turned pro after 1952 matches, he was really the whole team in a way, because he was a fine doubles player as well, and in order to beat them, you had to beat him either in singles or doubles, and it was pretty hard to do back then.
Right. In that year when you finally knocked off the Aussies, tell me about the matches you played and your part in that victory.
Well, we had expected to win. This is again Trapert and myself. We played the whole match at 53 and 54. And in 1953, we went to Australia expecting to win, because it was the first year for Hood and Rosewall. They were sort of the young kids on the block, and we had the experience. And that year, I'd won Wimbledon, Tony'd won Forest Hills of the U.S. Championships, beating me in the finals. So we sort of looked like winning on paper, and obviously we were upset. We lost 3-2. So at that time, we vowed that if it took a whole year, we were going to win the next one. So we did take the whole year, and the next year, of course, we were not expected to win because they had a year of experience, and we were a year older. That was the way it was. I was the old man at that time, in 1954, because I was 31 years old. But we really built that whole year around winning the Davis Cup. That was our main goal. And Tony beat Lou Hode in the first match, and I beat Ken in the second, which was a match they had thought was a lock because I had lost 8 straight times to Roosevelt. But I did manage to beat him then, and then we won the doubles. So we won the first 3 matches. So it was really a great feeling of satisfaction, I think, to have played that whole year with that goal in mind and to have accomplished it.
Right.
And incidentally, in front of a large crowd like that, it was really great.
Well, that is that's one of the pinnacles of our Davis Cup, and I think it had been quite a few years, had it not been, since the United States had won the Davis Cup.
Well, we had been winning it right after World War II with Kramer and Parker and Talbot and Mulloy and those fellows, and then in 1950 is when the first year that the Australians brought it back to Australia. They had been over there during the war years. They won it in '39, and we didn't have any Davis Cup from '39 to '46, so they held it then. But they assumed the dominance in about 1950, and that was mainly Frank Sedgwick. And they brought it back, and they kept it then, with exception of 1 or 2 years for 12 or 13 years. They were tough, and it was very seldom that they lost.
Right. Vic, what was the kind of the financial arrangement playing Davis Cup? I know it was mostly for country and glory, but obviously the Davis Cup committee did have to pick up some expenses. But
sure. Well, this was obviously before Open Tennis. Open Tennis didn't come in until 1968, so all of my tennis career was played in the quote amateur days. Unquote, which is really a bad word because it implies the wrong thing. What it meant was that we weren't allowed to receive any kind of payment except expenses, which we were allowed to receive, and airfares and things like that, but we weren't allowed to make any kind of a profit at all doing anything. We couldn't endorse anything. So we were getting $15 a day in expense money, out of which we had to pay for our food and everything else, but and then even in those days, the Aussies were only getting $10 a day, I think so.
Listen, we heard from John Van Ryn, who played, quite a few years before you did, and he was saying then it was $3 a day.
Yeah.
So it was, of course, a dollar went a lot further then than it did in your era.
It's funny story if you got a second. In 1951, which was the first year I played Davis Cup over there, we played Sedgman and McGregor, and it got down to the final match, which was Frank and myself. It was 2 matches all, and we were up in the locker room. In those days, we changed together and everything. We were good friends, and we had about 18,000 people or so out there. So we were sitting up in the locker room like this, like you and I, and Frank says to me, I wonder what it would be like if we just decided we didn't play. Or I said, well, maybe if they gave us $10,000, we'd play. Something like that. So we joked about it like that because we really, he was getting $10 a day and I was getting 15. So it's a little different now than it was then. And I can see, looking back on it, it was a great honor, I think, to play for your country in those days. It still is, and a lot of the players still feel that way. But money changed the thing around and made the priorities a little different for some of the players, I think, in recent years. Although I think it's heading back that way a little bit. Plus now they do get paid, so there really isn't any reason for them not to want to play unless it takes too much time from them.
Vic, in doubles play, you mentioned that you teamed with Tony. I know you all really had a very successful record, I think, as a Davis Cup team. What sort of was the secret of your chemistry with Traver?
Well, we did play well together. We won all the majors with the exception of Wimbledon, and we won most of the Davis Cup matches that we did play. I think the answer was that we complemented each other very well style-wise. In other words, Tony was big and strong, had a powerful ground strokes, big backhand. and a strong serve, and he wasn't probably as mobile on the court as I was. I was a little quicker on the court, and I didn't have his power, but I had a little bit more speed. So that actually what he could do, I needed, and what I could do, he needed. So we paired up well for that reason, and we got along well. We were good friends. We were off the court. I think all those things make for a good doubles team, and over the years there have been some great teams like Allison and Van Ryn and Budge and Mako and some of those teams. And mainly we played together a lot. We knew each other's game backwards and forwards, and we just teamed up well together. And I think that was one of the reasons. And so did the Aussies back then too. Both Oswald teamed up very well with Sedgman, McGregor. So we had some great doubles matches. I think. Very good.
Right. Could you tell us about any of the other characters that were playing Davis Cup outside of Australia during that era?
Well, we had to play, of course, through to get to the challenge round in those days, and most of the early round matches were fairly easy because we played teams in the American zone, the Caribbean, and things like that. There really weren't too many good players. Maybe occasionally one good player somewhere, but it took more than one to do it, unless he was an extremely good doubles player. Sweden was quite good in those days, as was Belgium. They had Philippe Washer and Jackie Grichon. The Swedes had Sven Davidson and Leonard Berglund. So we played either one of those, I think, most of the time in the interzone finals in Australia. But again, on grass, which is what we played on, we pretty much had the edge because they weren't quite as good on the grass. If we'd have had to play them on clay or slower courts, it might have been a little tougher. But we had some close calls with Belgium one year. It got down to the final match, and I played Jackie Grichon, who had beaten me once before. And the odd story about that was that these matches were played in December over there, and the U.S. Lawn Tennis Association at that time shared in the gross profits from the challenge rounds that we played over there. It was a big money thing for Australia and for the U.S. for their associations. And oddly enough, they were so sure every year that we would get to the challenge round that they had already spent the money we were going to get to the challenge round. So
the dangerous procedure.
By a strange coincidence, it got down to the last match in the interzone final, and I'm playing somebody that had beaten me before.
Right.
But he was pretty tired, and he lasted about one set because he played a long doubles match and a long singles match. So I finally won. But we often think back, what would have happened if I'd have lost that match? The U.S. LTA would have been bankrupt.
Right.
They had been in deficit financing like the U.S. government, and I don't know what would have happened, but of course I wasn't thinking about that. But by an odd coincidence, it came down to one match, and it was pretty close. But luckily we got through and got to the challenge round, so they got their 100,000 or whatever they got from the challenge rounds.
Right, great. You know, I know one thing, of course, that's different about Davis Cup play as compared to just individual play, is that coaching is allowed in Davis Cup play. And what is your feeling about that as to whether that's, really makes a big difference to the players, or is it not so important?
Yeah, I think it does. In fact, in Davis Cup play, it was the only time when I was playing that we had chairs on the court that we could sit down. In fact, it's the only time I ever did sit down in a tennis match was during Davis Cup play. And of course, I also was a captain a couple of times, so I know it from that side. I think what the captain has to do is, first of all, he has to have the respect of the players. They have to feel that he knows what kind of pressure they're under. Because it's a little different than just playing tournaments. So if a Davis Cup captain has been through that Davis Cup competition, I mean, he knows the pressure that's on you. It's a little bit better than somebody who hasn't, even though he may know more about tennis. But I think that's important, that you feel confident in that person's knowledge of what you're going through, so that if he suggests something, you're going to listen to him.
Right.
And I know I felt that way when I was a player. If it were somebody that were trying to tell me something that I didn't really feel he knew enough about it, I wouldn't pay any attention. But we were lucky. We had Billy Talbot most of the time as our captain, who had played a lot of Davis Cup and was very, very knowledgeable, and so we had no problems that way at all. But I think it's important that whoever's a captain, that he have the respect of his players, and part of that is having been through that Davis Cup competition himself.
Right.
That's important.
I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about your experience as a captain, because you are one of just a handful of Americans who've been on both sides of it, as a player as well as a captain.
Well, in 1951 was the first year we went down there. We had actually Frank Shields was our captain, Brooke Shields' grandfather, and then in 1952 they didn't give us much hope of beating Australia, so we had what we called the economy team. I was a playing captain that year. I played and was captain also. And then again in 1964, when we were defending that year, and I was the captain for one match in Cleveland. But I think I'd much rather be a player than a captain. I don't think there's any worse feeling than sitting there, or even any match, for example, to be really pulling for somebody so hard and not being able to do anything about it except just root and pull and help out a little when they change over, but you can't physically do anything. And I think that's an awful feeling, and I don't know if I could have stood that, very much of that. The year that I was playing captain, I had Tony on the team and Ham Richardson and Straight Clark, so we had a very good team from the point of view of all of us got along very well. And then in the later year when I was captain in '64, it was entirely Chuck McKinley and Dennis Ralston. And Arthur Ashe was on that team, but he didn't play. They played the whole thing. So we had a close match that year with Australia. We lost 3-2. So I haven't got a very good record as a captain. But again, we played some pretty tough
I was going to say it all depends on when you come in tennis, and who's kind of the dominant player. You can only do so much with the talent you've got.
Right. We did play close all the time, and we had some great matches with the Aussies. And I look back on those. I think those were great years in Davis Cup competition. Anybody that was lucky enough to have lived through that era, I think, would recall that was just great Davis Cup times, big matches.
I want to know that I second that, because I was, one of the cannon fodder on the some of the tournaments on the circuit, and was just close enough to it to really enjoy. And of course, I was out there rooting for you and Tony and whatever, and those were great years. And it was, I think, as you say, there's nothing really greater than Davis Cup play, and you're pulling not only for your friends who are out there, but in addition, you want your country to win. And it also is great that during that era that you could be unreservedly proud of the guys on your team, because you and Tony, for example, were just marvelous sports, and it never entered my mind that you wouldn't be. I mean, it's funny. I mean, only later did I realize what a golden era it was. So, but anyway, I do want to thank you for taking time to visit about the Davis Cup, and it's great to see you again.
It's great seeing you, and those are great memories, and I shall always treasure them very much. And thank you very much for allowing me to talk about it a little bit.
Well, you're mighty kind to take the time to do it. Thanks again, Vic.
Thanks.
Right. My name is Steve Potts, and I'm a member of the USTA Davis Cup Committee. And I'm very pleased and honored to have as a guest today Gardnar Mulloy, who played for the United States Davis Cup team. And Gardnar, first, thanks for being here, sharing some time, and wonder if you'd mind just telling me about perhaps your most vivid memory of play in Davis Cup.
Well, I always wanted to play Davis Cup, and I was on the squad 1939 when they didn't have Davis Cup anymore, and then I was in the service. Matter of fact, I was over in the Italian theater with your father.
Oh.
And of course he was a hero. I was skipper of an LST. Went through a few invasions, and Ramsey.
It's actually my brother. But I'll tell him you call him my father. I love it.
Well, anyway, he became a hero. Well, anyway, I never did play Davis Cup. When I came back, and I got back on the circuit, and I always wanted to play Davis Cup. I finally made the team. Captain Walter Pate was our captain. He took us over to Australia. who held the cup. We played a couple of semifinal round matches to get there. And we played Kooyong Stadium in Melbourne, Australia. And I got to play a singles match against Danny Pales. And Jack Kramer played Denny the first day and beat him, and then I played him the third day after the doubles. Billy Talbert and I were supposed to play the doubles, but they ended up putting Kramer and Schroeder in there, and they won. Frankie Parker was on the team at that time, so I went out there to play Denny Pales, and I had a bet with Kramer that I would beat him worse than he did. And I did.
That's an audacious bet.
I know.
And
Well,
that's really a tough one to win, and you did win it.
Well, he was kidding me. So finally I did, and I won. I beat him by 1 game. And, I beat Kramer by 1
Beat Kramer by 1 game, right?
So after that, I was on the Davis Cup for 7 years. And the most enjoyable part of my life was the Davis Cup. Because you're representing the country, and there's nothing better. Billy Talbert and I played a number of Davis Cup doubles. I didn't play too many singles. But 1 year, they appointed me captain of the team to take down to Havana, Cuba, to play the Cubans. And I was #1 in the country at that time. So they asked me to be sure and play singles. I took a couple of players down there that were young, Ted Parson, Hugh Stewart, and they were very good. And we played a semifinal match against the Philippines in Cincinnati. And I had those 2 boys there because they were on the team that were in Cuba. I was working their tails off. And while we were playing the Davis Cup, I had them playing. Every now and then, they'd say, "Is that enough, Captain? Is that enough?" I said, "Play another set." So we went down there and we were in good shape. And I knew the Cuban players pretty well, Vic from Miami, and Fisher Island. At that time was a small development where I'm now a tennis director emeritus. But I saw that these 2 boys were playing very well. So I put them in the singles when they had to draw. I got a wire from the US LTA, which was their name in those days, and they said, "Why aren't you playing singles?" And I didn't answer them. And the boys went out and they won their first 2 matches. Then I got a wire from the US LTA telling me how brilliant captain I was. So I played doubles with Hugh Stewart, and we won the doubles. And I was still captain of the team when we went to Jamaica to play the British West Indies. And they had a good team, and it was on grass in Kingston. And then I got another wire from the association. I better damn play singles. So I played singles, and the kids played, and I played with Hugh Stewart, and we won that match, of course. And when I came back, I was on the team, and Ulrich Mann was the captain. And I don't know why they didn't go to the Dominican Republic and Kingston and Cuba. I don't know. I guess they felt confident that we were strong enough to win, but not our best boys.
Right. Well, I can imagine with you and Hugh Stewart on the court, both of you having huge forehands, you could batter people down if they got to the net.
Yeah, we had pretty good size, too.
That's right.
Ray Garridio and his brother were on the Davis Cup team. And the captain and the committee of Cuba, playing it in Havana, came to me and wanted to know which one of them should play one. I said, "What are you asking me for?" I said, "Well, you know more about these 2 players than I do."
Oh, goodness.
So Ray Garridio is still in Miami, and he's head of the public parks, and he still plays. I think he's #1 or 2 in the 55 now.
Well, now, did he come over from Cuba after Castro took over, or did he come over earlier?
No, he came over after Castro, and his brother stayed there. And he runs a chicken farm. And he comes visit in Miami once in a while. That's it. But I won the Cuban National Championships twice. That was before Castro.
Right.
And I went back about 5 or 6 years ago. I was invited back because I wanted to put on a Billie Jean King type match with Bobby Riggs. And I wanted Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King to play against their best players. When we got there, they surveyed the place and they set up a court in their huge basketball arena, which is a little shorter than a tennis court, but it was adequate. And then they found out, well, they had figured that Billie Jean King was a man. So they have a rule that men cannot play against women. So they scratched the match, and I flew back. And it was very funny. Going down there, instead of flying directly to Havana, we had to take a zigzag course. And we had a little two-man plane, and I was scared to death we were going to get shot down any minute. And they kept making a zigzag and landing. And then a bunch of soldiers came out with guns and bayonets. And it was scary.
Right.
But we
Feel like you're really in a police state.
Yeah, and then when I was ready to leave, they wouldn't let me leave. I had to stay an extra week. And I had to fly to Canada because they still had a relationship with Canada. Flew commercially to Canada and caught another plane back. I didn't think I was going to get out of there.
Good heavens.
Mike McClaney, had a gambling casino at the National Hotel.
Right.
And when Castro came in, Mike was there. He wasn't at the casino at the time, but these officers in the Army came in, in brown suits. And they went up to the manager, who was a man that weighed about 300 pounds, and he said, big fat guy, and he said, open the safe. And he said, I don't know the combination. So he put a pistol in his mouth and said, open the safe. This guy was sweating. And of course, he opened the safe and they took out about $250,000, so Mike says. And they put Mike in jail. And luckily he had a wad of bills and he kept bribing the guards and so forth to get letters out and do this, that, and the other. And he was telling me that he couldn't see out of the state he was in, but they had a window that's high and he could hear these shots. And he assumed that Castro's men were
Executing people. Right.
So he was scared to death. So they had a trial. And I was practicing law at the time, and sort of, and he got a word out to me, please come and defend him because he needed an attorney. So I flew over there, and it was like a kangaroo court. And the thing that they had against him was that his wife had stuffed her brassiere with a lot of money and was trying to leave the country. So his wife was in Miami and wasn't even there. So I objected to it, and we got to talking, in front of the panel of judges, and they brought out his wife, and it was a very large black woman. And Mike, being from New Orleans, started screaming, "That's not my wife! That's not my wife!" And so they finally let him go, and we flew back. That was scary for him.
My Lord. What the crazy things that playing Davis Cup can lead you into.
Right.
That kind of predicament.
Well, I went back to where we played the Davis Cup,
Right.
to the Gatto Tennis Club
Right.
in Havana, and it is now ramshackle. They still have tennis there, but it's for the common people, so-called, anybody can come. So. And while I was there, they asked me to be the national coach for the Cuba Davis Cup team, Cuba Development, so forth. And they were all over me all the time, and I was scared to say no.
Right.
So I said yes, but I had to get back to mine and work out my affairs and stuff. And you had the minister of state and the minister of sports and so forth at a big dinner that I was invited to. And Castro came to it. And they started talking to me about the Bay of Pigs. And I was scared to say anything. What was I going to say? Well, we should have done this, or why did you do this, or something. So I just agreed with everything they said. It didn't make sense to me because I didn't understand what they were talking about.
Right.
And of course I had somebody that was interpreting to me. And so he stayed and he talked and talked and talked, smoked a cigar. And it was quite a, I don't say an honor, because it wasn't an honor, it was quite a situation that I'm there with
Right.
Castro. So finally left. And then the next year they wanted me to come back and organize a former big league baseball game with their best team.
Right.
So I started recruiting in the United States these past players, Stramsky and Mantle and all those guys. And then when I flew back to set it up, they took me out to see a game, and oh, it was crowded. Everybody was there, and it was their league. And I was sitting in Castro's box, but he wasn't there. And after it was over, when I started telling them who we were having, they canceled it. And I said, why? And they said, well, we have to fix up the field at that time, and this, that, and the other, and all kinds of excuses. But I think the excuse was that my team might beat theirs.
They just didn't want to run the risk of an embarrassment.
One of the most interesting stories that I have in regards to tennis was years ago at Wimbledon, Lady Crossfield, who was part of the royal family somewhere down the line, she has sort of a mansion, and in her backyard, so to speak, she has these grass courts, 2 of them. And each year, the Sunday before Wimbledon, she would invite 2 players from various countries. And she invited Dick Savitt and I, we were doubles partners. And we went to this thing, and she charged £5 to come in and had members of the royalty there. And it was for charity. So we were sitting around this big table, and that time, Queen Elizabeth came, and I'd never met her. So I was sitting on her right, Dick was on her left, and then we got to talking. And I said to her, Your Majesty, I don't understand why you've never been to Wimbledon. Your mother's been there, and King Gustav has been there, and your father, they let play in the doubles 25 years ago, and your sister's been there, and the Duke and Duchess been there, but we've never had the pleasure of you. And Lady Crossfield sitting across the table with all these players around said, My dear Mr. Mulloy, you must recognize the fact that it's a matter of protocol. She has a lot of things to do. And she has to go to Ascot, she has to do this. And being a smart-headed American, I turned to her and I said, well, I thought, Your Majesty, that you weren't able to get tickets. So I thought maybe I would get you some. So anyway, 2 years later, Dick Savitt and I were in the doubles. She was there in the royal box for the first time in history. And after we won, we beat Ode and Frazier in the finals.
Fantastic win.
Yeah, lucky. So she came down, they rolled out the carpet. She came down and presented us with the trophies, the cups. So I bowed to her and she handed me mine, and I said, Your Majesty, you probably don't remember me, but I'm Gardnar Mulloy. I met you at Lady Crossfield's garden party. She says, My dear Mr. Mulloy, I remember you very well. As a matter of fact, I had difficulty getting in today because you forgot to leave me tickets.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful story.
She has a sense
Had
of
the sense of humor, right, and a wonderful memory. Really. Gardnar, what I know, one of your doubles partners for years that everybody just linked your name with Billy Talbert,
Right.
and wonder if you'd tell us how you and Talbert got linked up, and a little bit about particularly your Davis Cup play with him.
Well, when I got back out of the service, I started playing tennis. I didn't have a partner. And Billy was teamed with Vic Seixas. And I talked Billy out of playing with Vic to play with me. And we asked Vic if Vic said, sure, okay, I'll find somebody else. And we started out together. And it just so happened that we blended. Billy played the forehand court, I played the left court. And he made all the sharp shots, and I was more or less the finisher. So we complemented each other, and we went on, and we didn't lose a match to an American team for 10 years.
Good Lord.
And Sidney Swartz and Tom Mulloy, no relation, spelled a little different,
Right.
had us in the final set, Cincinnati in the finals, and a break, and Sidney served for the match. And as we changed courts, we hadn't lost in years. Billy turns to me and he says, well, all Sidney does have to do is hold serve. And I said, yeah, I guess we're going down because Sidney's got such a great serve. I don't know how we're going to handle it. And I said, well, afterwards, we ought to, his father, Sidney Swartz's father, was quite a tennis enthusiast.
Right.
And we said, he used to show up for all of Sidney's matches. He wasn't there. We said, well, let's you and I pay for the call to his father to tell him what a great win this was for Sidney. So Sidney goes back and chokes. So we end up winning the match.
You end up winning the match.
Right.
Oh, God, that's great. Well, what was, as a doubles team, for 10 years you didn't lose to any Americans. Who were your biggest rivals internationally?
Oh, well, it was always the Australians. It was Bromwich and Quist, and Sedgman and McGregor, and Bromwich and Frank Sedgman.
Right.
We didn't lose all the matches, but we lost twice to them in the finals. And we beat Hartwig and Sidwell. Played them in the Davis Cup twice at match, and they beat us. And we won some clay court national championships. We won, of course, 4 national championships.
What was it that made Bromwich such a good doubles player? I mean, I know he won Wimbledon with a couple of different partners, and
There's only one word I could say is canny. He had that one-handed and two-handed, and he chips around. Never had any power. Frank had power.
Right.
And I missed an overhead smash in the 5th set to break serve against Sedgman and Bromwich. And then I was playing with Tom Brown. And they beat us in 5 sets. What can I tell you?
Well, it couldn't have been one overhead smash that made all the difference. You took a lot of other shots to get there.
Well, that was the break and serve.
Right.
And what I did was, I had a short one, so instead of smashing it, I drop shot it. And Sedgman anticipated it, ran in, and just barely got it back. On the point. And Tom will never forgive me for that. Just like in the finals against Rosewell and Hode, we were #1 in the world, and Billy Talbot #2. And Sabat and I were playing in the finals of the French. And we had a match point, and I'm playing the left court. And Rosewell misses the first serve, the second serve comes, and I hit the ball down the line, and hit the take, came back. And Sabat has never forgiven me. Every time he sees me, I can never forget that time you hit the bottom of the net on match point guard. How could you do that? It's always the bottom of the net.
Always the bottom of the net, even though it was the tape.
Right. Next time it's going to be, one time he says, yeah, you hit your own service line on the return.
Oh, God. Well, the memories do get sort of gilded with age, you might say. The stories improve.
They improve, and they're great. You know, tennis has been good to me. And you know, like one year I got to the semifinals of Wimbledon and I lost, and I come back a little over the hill, and see my contemporaries on Flagler Street in Miami or over in Fisher Island, and they would say, "Hey Gar, what's the matter with you? Why don't you quit tennis?" I said, "What do you mean quit tennis?" I said, "Well, you don't win." I said, "What do you mean I don't win?" "No, you don't win like you used to." And I said, "Well, you're right." You know, I said, "But I got to the semifinals of Wimbledon. That means I'm one of the 4 best players in the world."
Right.
"Yeah, but you don't win. You should practice law. You should get out of tennis." I said, "You're right. I should practice law. And then in 20 years, I'll be able to save enough money to go to Europe." Now I've been around the world 32 times. And I said, and I pat him on the stomach saying, I said, "Yeah, I should be like you. You're 40 pounds overweight. And you have to wear a coat and tie every day and let out and open there." And then they get mad at me.
Right. Well, it's very true that you've had a great career in tennis, and it's obviously kept you in great shape, and you've continued to win in all the senior divisions as well. And certainly among the men, I think you're up there with the largest number of gold balls of anybody.
I have 94.
That's fantastic, really. Wonderful.
Everybody's trying to catch me. My doubles partner, Vern Hughes, you know, we've never lost a doubles match. And we started with the 60s, 65s, and you know, and the gold balls mount up.
Right.
And he kept saying he's going to catch me, he's going to catch me. I said, "How can you catch me when I'm playing with you?"
Right. And you've got an edge in some singles gold balls and all the others as well with other partners. Well, it'll take some doing on his part to catch up with you. But I want to thank you on behalf of the USTA for spending some time today to visit with me and talk about all your wonderful tennis experiences, and especially about your Davis Cup experience.
Pleasure's all mine, Steve.
And I promise
I've
you,
broken the camera.
no, I promise you though, I will tell my brother Ramsey that you referred to him as my father, because I couldn't resist. Thanks again.
All right.